Sustainability Defined would like to thank Noveon Magnetics for sponsoring this episode. Visit noveon.co to learn more about Noveon Magnetics and how it exists to redefine and rebuild the re-earth magnet industry to be one that doesn't just power the needs of today, but can last to power every need far beyond tomorrow. That's noveon.co to learn more.
All right, Definers, welcome back to Sustainability Defined, where Scott and I are here defining sustainability, one topic and one bad joke at a time. This is episode 76 on rare earths. So, Scott, what does this episode look like?
Okay, well, first, Jay, what are rare earths? Why are rare earths important? Then, where are rare earth elements found? And then how, we're really hearing all the things, Jay. What, why, where, how? How are rare earth elements acquired, used, and recycled? And what are the sustainability considerations across that life cycle? Who are the leaders on the topics of rare earths? Are there any notable policies or initiatives related to rare earths and their sustainability? How can listeners best engage with and on rare earths? And then last, we'll introduce our expert guest, Scott Dunn, CEO of Noveon Magnetics. All right, Jay, this is going to be a tour de force of intro notes. Taylor Price really outdid herself on this one.
Crushed it. Absolutely crushed it. Nice job, Taylor.
Crushed it. Right. Hit this one out of the park. So, Jay, what are rare earths?
Okay. The term rare earths is likely a new term for you, dear definer, as until very recently, these elements were mainly familiar to geologists and specialized scientists. So what exactly are rare earths? The American Geosciences Institute defined rare earth elements, sometimes called REEs, as a set of 17 metallic elements within the periodic table. These elements have special fluorescent, conductive, and magnetic attributes, which make them very useful when mixed with other metals.
Specifically, these rare earth elements are the 15 lanthanides, along with scandium and yttrium. Atomic numbers 21, 39, and 57 to 71 for those keeping their atomic bingo at home. The term rare earth was coined in 1788 by a miner in Ytterby, Sweden, who discovered ore that he had never seen before, which upon further study was found to be a new element, yttrium. That must have been a good day for that miner. And yes, this unnamed miner. Hopefully we have his name. So, Jay, why are rare earths important?
These rare earth elements are critical for many applications that we have come to rely on in our daily lives. They play a role in everything from magnets and battery alloys to glass additives and nuclear fuel rods. In fact, many of these elements are involved in the advanced technologies we use each day in healthcare, transportation, power generation, and consumer electronics. The U.S. Department of Energy notes that these elements play a critical role in a few main areas: advanced technologies, economic growth, energy independence, our environmental future, and national security. Just some minor topics for you there, Scott.
Yeah, totally. And Jay, let's talk about some of these. So first, advancing technology. So if you're listening to this podcast, you are likely on a phone or laptop, both of which contain rare earths to function due to their conductive and magnetic properties. A phone, for example, uses lanthanum within the screen to make sure the colors are displayed vividly, while other rare earths, like dysprosium, are used to make your phone vibrate. Even if you are listening to this podcast in your car, you're using rare earths. Neodymium, another rare earth, is used for magnets in cars to power the vehicle's steering and other electronic functions like electric windows, power seats, and sound systems. Power seats. What's a power seat? Is that just like moving it back and forth?
Yeah, electronically.
All right, cool. I'm used to my old Mitsubishi. There was like a thing under the seat you had to lift up and push it.
Those days are long gone, Scott.
What a world we live in now. We don't have to do that anymore. Okay, so these magnets are also used within the inner workings of technology for flat screens, polished glass, speakers, and within the circularity that powers our lives. Some rare earths are even used within LED lighting, camera lenses, and televisions.
Scott, I heard you mention neodymium. In my mind, I thought I heard you said Neil Diamondium, and I'm thinking, wow, he's finally done it.
I'm sure he's been mistaken in the past.
Yeah. Okay, so next, and probably most interesting to our definers, is that rare earths are a critical input not to just technology broadly, but to technologies that support sustainability and the clean energy transition. As we look to mitigate the impacts of climate change and transition to more renewable energy sources, there will be an increased need for technology like wind turbines, batteries, and solar panels. This important infrastructure requires rare earth minerals to work. Many scientists note that decarbonization and electrification cannot happen without these elements. Consider that an offshore wind plant requires 9 times more mineral resources than a gas-fired plant. So as we look to reduce carbon emissions by bringing more renewables into our energy mix, we'll need to increase our rare earth usage.
Right, and rare earths also play a role in electrification of transportation. Minerals like lithium and cobalt, along with rare earths, are cited as key components in combustion power vehicles and the batteries that power electric cars. Now, note that EVs, they're currently only 2% of the global car market. However, with automakers across the globe looking to ramp up production of EVs to mitigate the climate impacts of fossil fuels, rare earths are going to be important there too. A 2022 article from Forbes reported that China is planning to build 6 million electric vehicles within the next year. That pace is going to require 30,000 tons of rare earths for just 1 year's worth of production of EVs in China.
Lastly, rare earths will continue to play a role in defense applications as a matter of national security, but also as a catalyst to economic growth. In light of this importance, the U.S. Department of Energy is working with other organizations to determine how best to extract, purify, and scale up the production of these critical elements, as they're essential in the production of defense technologies like lasers, but also in items like satellites that provide GPS and wireless internet capabilities.
Right, and as mentioned, these rare earths are critical inputs into the goods and services that are provided within the economy, like consumer electronics, renewable energy technologies, and the cars we mentioned. A lack of these materials have negative economic implications too, by reducing the number of goods and services our economy can sell. It's estimated that the global market for tradable rare earths is between 3 and 5 billion, pretty big, but the end market for final goods that use rare earths as inputs is over $1 trillion. So there's a lot of money at stake here to having that reliable supply of rare earths.
A 2022 briefing from the Biden-Harris administration noted that global demand for critical materials like rare earths are on pace to increase by 400 to 600% over the next several decades. And as we have seen through the COVID-19 pandemic, complex supply chains are difficult to maintain. As a result, the U.S. is looking to strengthen domestic supplies of these critical minerals. However, as you'll learn within this episode, increasing the supply of these elements is a challenging and complex process.
The U.S. is not the only country that understands the importance of these metals to economic and political development. EU Commission President Ursula von der Leyen mentioned during her 2022 State of the Union address that, quote, lithium and rare earths are already replacing gas and oil at the heart of the EU economy, end quote. She continued by stressing that the demand for these materials will increase 5x by 2030, and access to these critical materials is what spurred the recent European Critical Raw Materials Act, a 2023 proposal to ensure a more secure and sustainable supply chain for the critical raw materials that are used within the digital and net zero industries, along with aerospace and defense. Okay, listeners, so we went over why rare earths are important for advanced technologies, economic growth, energy independence, our environmental future, and national security. So hopefully you all agree these things are important. So let's talk about where they're found, the ramifications of taking them out of where they're found, all that jazz. So Jay, let's talk about where are they found.
Excellent. So despite the name rare earths, these elements are not actually super rare. In fact, one of the elements, cerium, is the 25th most abundant element of the 78 most common elements within the Earth's crust. And a few of these elements are actually more common than gold. Research from the U.S. Geological Survey in January 2023 details that there are approximately 130 million metric tons of rare earth reserves that have yet to be mined and are currently within the ground. The majority of the resource deposits are estimated to be in Vietnam, Russia, China, and Brazil.
So some definers say, okay, there's actually a fair bit out there. What's the problem? Well, while they are fairly abundant, you're right, the process for mining and extracting them is extremely difficult. They're often found in relatively small concentrations on their own, and most times are mixed together with other radioactive elements like uranium that can be dangerous to handle and hard to purify. Because of this, many of the rare earths come from a very small number of sources and geographies. So the rarity of these elements ultimately is not so much that they don't exist, but the difficulty in extracting and processing them. So we're going to dig more into how these elements are mined in a little bit.
Dig. Nicely done, Taylor. Well played.
Oh, yeah. Nice.
Okay. It is important to note here that 2022 research showed that while these minerals may be somewhat abundant across the world, China produces 70% of these minerals and controls the majority of the supply chain. The EU, for example, has no major mining of these elements within their nations, even though they are extremely important raw material resources for the energy independence and carbon neutrality that European nations are seeking. Notably, the EU currently imports 98% of its supply of rare earth minerals from China.
So a similar situation in the United States, but not quite that drastic, because the U.S. has Mountain Pass Mine, a 400-foot pit within the California Clark Mountain Range. It's the only rare earth mine in the U.S., and it's owned by a company called MP Materials. Now, this mine was actually the primary global source for rare earths from 1960s to the 1990s, so China wasn't always the dominant player here. But today, it only supplies around 15% of the world's production of rare earths. And interestingly, the majority of what's currently extracted within Mountain Pass is sold and shipped to refiners outside of the U.S., so we don't have all of the aspects of the supply chain here. As a result, the majority of rare earths actually used within the United States are imported from countries like China, 74% of imports from 2018 to 2021, Malaysia, 8% of imports, Estonia and Japan, both about 5%, and then the rest split amongst other countries. So MP Materials, they're looking to change this dynamic. They're looking to expand their operations to include more production within the U.S. in an effort to vertically integrate and make more domestic this process to lessen future supply chain impacts.
And a bit more on China's near monopoly on the supply chain for rare earths. In recent years, China has come to control 91% of refining activity, 87% of oxide separation, and 94% of magnet production. Incredible stats. Mm-hmm. This came to be not only because of the deposits there, but the Chinese government is also investing vast resources, both political and financial, into the rare earth mining economy. As a result, it produces the metals at a much cheaper price than the US and others. This dynamic is unlikely to change soon. A study from the International Energy Agency found that new mines take over 16 years to actually produce rare earth elements, since it takes many years to test the suitability of locations for new mines and then construct the infrastructure needed to begin production. Because of these long timeframes, even as countries like Sweden and Australia look to expand their own production, the timeframes to actually produce these elements create challenges. Okay, so Scott, how are rare elements acquired, used, and recycled, and what are the sustainability considerations across that life cycle?
Right, so we said where we get them, now let's talk about how you get them. So while we need minerals for so much of modern life, mining can be an environmentally destructive practice, creating a lot of land, water, and air pollution, along with deforestation, all of which can ultimately affect biodiversity, ecosystem health, and human health. And this isn't any different for the mining of rare earth elements. So most of the ores, which is natural rock or sediment that contains one or more valuable minerals concentrated above background levels, containing these elements typically have to be mined using an open pit. This is a process that involves blasting rocks open to break them and expose the ores. The ore is then transported into a concentration plant where the rock is crushed multiple times, treated with chemicals, and smelted to be separated into different parts.
The process of mining and refining is extremely difficult and highly complex. There are only a handful of plants around the world that actually process these rare earth elements. The process to acquire even small amounts of these elements requires a lot of ore and extraction of rocks from the environment, which alters the natural environment dramatically. Many times the open pits where ore is excavated are left unfilled after extraction. Even when the pits are filled with leftover rock, it can never be returned to its naturally occurring state. This can create changes in the geochemistry of the landscape and can alter the groundwater.
Right, and the current production methods are extremely wasteful too. A lot of the waste generated from rare earth operations, they're not just any type of waste. These wastes can be radioactive or toxic, is rare earths are often found in combination with hazardous materials. The byproducts of mining can seep into groundwater or pollute the air, causing both environmental and health hazards. In fact, recent research suggests that for each ton of rare earths that are produced, over 2,000 tons of toxic waste are also produced. Let me just say that again. For every ton of rare earths that are produced, over 2,000 tons of toxic waste are also produced. 2,000 to 1. That's crazy. And this toxic waste, this 2,000 to 1, is like, what do we do with it? Well, often it's not disposed of properly. It includes dust, waste gas, wastewater, and radioactive residue.
Much of the soil and water in the heavily mined regions of China are polluted with arsenic and fluorite due to the intensive mining practices. This contamination has affected the people living in this region, causing skeletal conditions and arsenic toxicity to the residents. In fact, the world's largest rare earth mine, Bayan Obo in China, has a wastewater pond with over 70,000 tons of radioactive thorium that is being stored without a proper lining.
Geez, Jay, this reminds me of the Washington Post. They did this series of articles recently. I forget exactly what it's called. It was something like Under the Hood or with EVs. And just that there's, with all this, the mining that it takes to make these sort of technologies, we talk about it. It is so important for the sustainable transition, but it has this other side to it. And I think this is what we're talking about, is this other side to rare earths. They enable so much, but
totally,
man, this is tough to get through here. And we're not done. I mean, because the environmental justice implications we want to talk about as well. And the majority of the people most impacted by mining of these critical materials and facing the brunt of the health issues in the more developing regions of China and other countries, like Jay just mentioned, this wastewater pond without a proper lining, they aren't the ones benefiting most from the technological advancements that I was referring to that rare earths bring. And there's actually an interesting 2020 article published within the International Journal for Philosophy of Chemistry that goes into the ethical considerations of mining for rare earth elements from an environmental and intergenerational justice lens. And we'll link to it in the show notes on our website, sustainabilitydefined.com, if you're interested in learning more about that and getting a link to the article.
So you, definer, might be thinking, continuing to mine for these metals doesn't seem sustainable.
Yeah.
And you're right. We should not solely be relying on new mines because of the complex environmental and social issues surrounding mining and production. Because of this, current research and technological advancements are looking to remedy the current issues in mining for these elements.
All right, so this is some more positive news. So, for example, researchers at Harvard University have worked to develop a method to extract these metals using bacteria and filters with lower acidity than conventional chemicals. Researchers express that this is a, quote, radically different, end quote, way to separate these materials. It can potentially revolutionize how we recover rare earths in a way that is much kinder to the environment. There's also a group out of China that has developed and tested on tons of soil an approach called electrokinetic mining that relies on electric currents to free the rare earth elements, sharply reducing the need for polluting chemicals.
Some companies are looking to reduce the use of rare earth elements altogether. In March of 2023, Tesla announced that their next generation of electric vehicles would be created without the use of rare earths.
That'd be pretty crazy, Jay, huh? If they were able to do that.
Totally.
Yeah.
And I actually didn't know that until this research.
Yeah.
The company has focused their attention away from these materials in an effort to reduce environmental impacts and supply chain risks. While there are a few alternative materials Tesla is looking into, like iron and nickel-based materials for magnets, some of these technologies are still in early development.
Another approach is finding rare earths in manufacturing byproducts. Researchers at Washington University in St. Louis have created a proof-of-concept solution to extract rare earth elements from coal fly ash, a fine powdery waste product from the combustion of coal. This novel extraction process uses supercritical fluid, commonly used to decaffeinate coffee, to recover rare earths from material that would have otherwise been discarded in a landfill. I love this, Jake. Getting the rare earths from coal fly ash, another not so great thing that we have to figure out what we're going to do with.
Definitely super cool. And I will admit, I honestly get a kick out of the term supercritical fluid, especially as it's used in coffee. Like, I wonder if it's actually supercritical of the taste of the coffee it's decaffeinating.
Yeah. And I love how someone was like, it's not just critical is not enough.
Right.
Oh, it's supercritical.
Bordering on like prejudiced fluid.
Yeah.
Okay. Other companies are looking into ways to recycle rare earths and then, in turn, use the recycled metals within their products. If you're excited about rare earths recycling, and of course we know you are, then make sure to stick around for our interview with the CEO of Noveon Magnetics, a leading REE recycler. While rare earths can be recycled, a 2018 study found that only 1% of all rare earths are recycled from their end products.
That's pretty lame.
Definitely pretty lame.
1%. Oof.
The other 99% of these important elements are thrown away as waste after the consumer use phase. This shortage of recycling is due to many reasons, but one main one is that there's often a lack of collection infrastructure available to get these materials back at the end of consumer use. And Scott, I do think of your day job here as you talk about recycling infrastructure generally.
Yes. Luckily, the cans, there's many of them. We just got to get them back. But I think we're going to get into this. But even if they collect the e-waste and it goes to an electronic recycler, they don't all have the means or bother to collect the rare earths. So that's why it's so crazy. You only get that 1% number. Because even with some of the stuff we get back, we don't get the rare earths out.
Totally. And Scott, you nailed it. It has to do with the tiny quantities of rare earths in these products. So even when these products are collected, the rare earths are often of too small a quantity to actually recover and then recycle.
They're just always rare. All right. And companies are starting to think more about how to recover these important components at the end of life for products as the supply chain issues continue, and they look to improve overall sustainability importance. With large amounts of rare earths already in existence, if they can practically be recovered and recycled, there can be less supply chain, environmental, and social impacts.
One company making progress on recycling and recovering rare earths is Apple.
Classic.
I almost said an Apple of 2023.
Jay, do you remember when Tim Cook was in a meeting with Donald Trump, and Donald Trump referred to him as Tim Apple?
No.
Yeah. I guess he forgot his name, and then he was like, we'll just call him Tim Apple, the CEO of Apple. Yeah.
Yeah, to be fair, that is how I know him also.
It's pretty funny.
Okay. In April of 2023, Apple announced that it is working to expand the amount of recycled materials within all their product lines and reduce their reliance on newly mined materials. This includes a goal from the company to have all of the magnets within Apple devices be sourced entirely from recycled rare earth elements. During the announcement, Apple mentioned that magnets are the biggest use of rare earths for the company. In 2022, Apple had already made some pretty significant strides towards this goal. At year-end 2022, the company reported that over 66% of all aluminum and about 73% of the rare earths used by the company within iPhones, iPads, Apple Watches, and computer models were made from recycled materials.
Right. The progress is due in large part to those iPhone take-back and trade-in programs. Apple has created their own internal supply chain to get products back after use. Apple then uses robots and other technology to disassemble their own products and separate the components to allow specialty recyclers to recover these in-demand materials, especially rare earths, which the company noted are often lost within traditional electronic recycling. So those iPhone trade-in programs, really critical to advancing these goals for the company, not just for saving you and I and the Definers a little bit of money. And Jay, I don't know if you've seen this. There's a video of an Apple robot taking apart a phone. And I think they even gave it the robot a name, like Lucy or something. And it's cool because you're seeing that the robot is taking apart the electronics, and it just means we don't have to put a human there doing it, and we can do it much faster.
That's cool. And I'm imagining Lucy doing a phenomenal job and just taking apart. I mean, we all think of our phones as just a single entity, right? But then all of a sudden, if it's opened up and you're pulling out just hundreds of little pieces and component parts, I mean, that sounds mind-blowing.
Right, totally. And Jay, let's get into, so Apple, leader in getting some of these rare earths back when it comes to consumer electronics, but let's talk about other leaders. So Jay, tell us about some within this topic of rare earths.
There are a few key organizations working globally on rare earths. One organization, the Rare Earths Industry Association, or REIA, is an international nonprofit based in Belgium that represents the entire rare earths value chain. Importantly, the REIA is looking to develop an updated life cycle analysis for rare earth production so that policymakers and businesses can better understand their environmental impacts and make better decisions about the production and management of these materials. They also have goals for this data to be incorporated into the life cycle assessments for all of the end-use products these materials are utilized within. In June 2023, the REIA hosted its annual conference and General Assembly in Barcelona, Spain. The conference brought together key stakeholders from the industry to learn about the latest developments, solutions, challenges, and technologies.
Apologies for Taylor that we did not send her to this conference to research this episode. And Jay, I will tell you, real-time fact-checking, actually the Apple robot, the name is Daisy.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Different,
Also a
but
nice name.
equally as cute.
Yes. Okay. So another organization, the Consortium for Rare Earths Technologies, also known as CREATE, capital C, capital R, capital E, lowercase a, uppercase t, lowercase e. Well, they're getting cute with it.
Sometimes you got to stretch, but, it can work.
All right. Is an organization that is working to develop technologies for extracting, processing, reclaiming, and finding alternatives for these rare earth elements. CREATE is looking to invent technologies that not only improve the feasibility of these elements, but also to reduce their environmental impact. So this is a fairly new organization, but CREATE's already got 120 members with expertise across the rare earth supply chain in the US, from end users to processors to universities. Okay, Jay, let's move into policies and initiatives related to rare earths and their sustainability.
Okay. While a key pillar in the International Energy Agency's comprehensive approach to mineral security is mainstreaming higher environmental and social standards, most policy is related to increasing its production rather than improving sustainability. For example, a bipartisan bill recently considered in the U.S. Congress, the Rare Earth Magnet Manufacturing Production Tax Credit Act of 2023.
See, that act, you don't even have a fun acronym with it.
No, and that is a mouthful. This act, that I will not repeat, would create a tax credit for rare earth magnet production in the United States. It includes a $20 per kilogram credit for U.S.-made magnets, while manufacturers sourcing 90% of their component parts from U.S. producers could be entitled to a $30 per kilogram credit, with both credits phasing out at the end of 2025.
And just to be clear, that was a proposed bill, not passed yet, but still interesting. And some policies are looking to improve sustainability by increasing transparency. Canada's Critical Mineral Strategy, released in 2022, says the country, quote, is seeking to advance efforts that support human rights through collaboration on transparency and traceability in the critical mineral supply chain, as under Canada's Extractive Sector Transparency Measures Act, or ESTMA. There you go. There's your acronym.
Nice.
And through participation in international activities like the Extractive Industries Transparency Initiative, end quote.
And related to human rights here, there's also honoring commitments in the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, or UNDRIP, as part of any rare earth extraction or recycling. In August 2022, Indigenous leaders launched the Secure Indigenous Peoples' Rights in a Green Economy, or SIRGE. The SIRGE coalition is focused on full implementation of the UNDRIP, including the right to free, prior, and informed consent in all endeavors related to the extraction, mining, production, consumption, sale, and recycling of transition minerals and rare earth minerals around the world.
Jay, I could see us doing like an atypical episode or something where we just talk about the UNDRIP and that free, prior, and informed consent. That's a term of art, and that would be interesting to dive into as well.
Love it.
Okay, so 2 potential sources of rare earth elements outside of land on Earth entail regulations that are still in development. This is cool. So lunar mining and asteroid mining could provide sources of rare earths. You didn't think we were going to talk space today, but we are. So the Outer Space Treaty of 1967, which I had never heard of that. Jay, have you heard of that?
No.
Okay. Well, it's signed by 113 countries, says that space is free for exploration and use by all countries, and that no nation can claim ownership to celestial bodies. And Jay, that's of course, everybody just be cool. We can all use it. No one exploit it. That solves it, right? Well, it's not clear how this treaty applies to exploiting resources on the moon or asteroids. Don't worry, the UN's on it. They formed a group to develop principles for the exploration and exploitation of space resources. And also don't worry, the private sector is already on it. A company called Astroforge, all one word, an asteroid mining startup is planning to launch 2 missions this year in 2023 to explore mining asteroids that are thought to have abundant platinum group elements.
That is super fascinating. So,
Yeah.
All right, we're talking sky high up in space. We're going to go deep down low into the bottom of the deep sea.
Yeah.
So the International Seabed Authority is working on finalizing regulations for mining the ocean floor of the deep sea. Collecting minerals in the deep sea would require large machines that scrape the ocean floor, generating clouds of sediment and potentially disrupting marine ecosystems. So something else to watch out for.
That sounds not so great.
No.
Got to be more precise somehow. Hopefully we can get there.
Scott, have you seen the movie The Meg?
No. Is that recent?
It's recent. It's Jason Statham with a gigantic monster shark that I think emerges from the bottom of the deep sea. So I'm just thinking that if we're mining down there, we can't unintentionally unleash these like monster sharks. Just something for the International Seabed Authority to keep in mind.
Did they show the clouds of sediment? Was it that realistic?
I'm pretty sure they did, and I'm pretty sure the result was not favorable to a lot of people on land.
Oh boy. Okay.
Okay. All right. So aside from watching The Meg, how can listeners best engage with and on rare earths?
Right. Well, the Science History Institute Museum and Library details 3 main ways that we as consumers can make the rare earth economy more sustainable. The first, supporting recycling. Rather than throwing away or discarding technology, batteries, cars, etc., we must actively ensure they are donated or recycled. Also, individuals can support legislation and policy proposals that incentivize and expand technology recycling programs for hard-to-recycle items like phones and computers, but also things like decommissioned airplanes or wind turbines for those that, have those lying around. Okay.
Oh, bingo. Nicely done.
All right. While there are still small-scale recycling and take-back programs like the one we mentioned earlier from Apple, these are not widespread enough quite yet. Hopefully they get there.
Second, consumers can support right to repair policy and legislation. You may have noticed that sometimes when a component in your technology breaks, it is impossible to fix yourself or can't be fixed at all, even if the issue is minor. Many times this is due to the fact that the technology is not designed to be fixed or spare parts are not sold to consumers. The right to repair movement seeks to allow for consumers of devices and equipment to freely repair and fix their products, rather than opting for buying new products when something could just simply be fixed. By fixing existing technologies, consumers can in turn minimize the production of new materials like rare earths. If you're interested in supporting the right to repair legislation in the US, you can check out repair.org to follow current legislation, get involved in the topic, and engage your legislators.
Right to repair definitely becoming a hot topic in the US and around the world. So definitely,
really cool.
Yeah, understand if there's a bill you can get behind. And lastly, we can all become more informed consumers on the topic of rare earths. Just by understanding where the technologies we use come from and the importance of rare earths in our lives, we can make better choices about how we use and consume. Collectively, we can also let policymakers and companies know that we are interested in increased transparency on the use of rare earth elements, and increasing the sustainable use of these materials is important to us. For more on sustainability and transparency, check out episode 74. And so, Jay, let's set up our interview here. Our expert guest, Scott Dunn, CEO of Noveon Magnetics.
Right. So Scott Dunn has been the CEO of Noveon Magnetics since January 2016. Noveon is a U.S. manufacturer startup based out of Texas that recycles discarded rare earth magnetic material to produce cutting-edge, high-performance EcoFlux magnets, which can be used to power the batteries in EV motors, wind turbines, and other sustainable applications.
Right, and Scott oversees strategic planning and capital allocation for the company and has been featured in Forbes and Fortune. Scott's experience is in manufacturing with a background in environmental science and interests in geopolitics and natural resources. Scott is a conservationist who believes in economic freedom and technology, and he embraces a cornucopian worldview. I didn't know what that was, but I Googled it.
Nope.
And it means he believes technology and innovation can solve environmental and resource challenges posed by our growing population.
I like that.
So I guess he's also kind of an optimist.
Love it.
All right, let's hear what Scott's got to say. right, Definers, thanks for joining us. We're going to now hear from Scott Dunn, CEO at Noveon Magnetics, who is in the midst of a heat wave in Texas, but he's got his AC on, I presume, some water at his side, and he's ready to talk rare earths. Is that right, Scott?
Absolutely.
Okay, so we want to just start like we always do. We want to hear a bit more about you. So your bio mentions that you have experience in manufacturing. You've got this background in environmental science and interests in geopolitics, natural resources. So tell our listeners a little bit more about how you got interested in environmental issues, and then how did that lead to you working in manufacturing?
Well, I think more on the educational side, environmental science is a really polite way of referring to how poor of a student you likely were during your undergraduate days, which was the case in my case. I was actually down a chemical path, and you pretty much get to a point where you have to make a decision, which is, hey, are you going to graduate on time or not? And so you figure out what your credits can kind of support. In my case, I actually went the environmental science route. I also found myself after one class in particular, really fascinated about the history of mankind, if you will, but told through the lens of the periodic table. There's actually a really great book that influenced me at the time. It was a book called The Disappearing Spoon. And in that book, you kind of learn about what different kingdoms or historical cycles and civilizations and conflicts were kind of the result of various elements or geopolitical kind of resource constraints and conflicts and things like that. And so it turns out that as I was also scrapping metal on the side to just kind of make money through high school, through college, it kind of pointed me in certain directions and to be focused on certain material streams. Very quickly, it became rare earths, and perhaps even more quickly, it became rare earth magnetic materials. And so at that point, you kind of ask yourself, am I ready to quit my real job? And am I ready to kind of stop being just maybe a scrap metal guy and maybe go take a leap and go see what there is at the end of this rabbit hole, which is rare earth and specifically rare earth magnetics. And that pretty much teleports us to about 2012 timeframe, where those types of life events, those types of geopolitical and current events essentially became the genesis or the formation of this business and with other founders and with other partners.
Well, I love this story. Why is it called Disappearing Spoon?
It's a play on words because basically gallium is practically something that melts at room temperature.
Yeah.
And so like the old court jester kind of alchemist would, kind of show this can't believe it type of a melting or disappearing spoon if all he did was maybe mix his tea with a special spoon. Now, the audience had no idea what the spoon was made out of. It wasn't some sort of a brasser or whatever they make utensils out of. It was sort of one of many various examples or anecdotes in this book that kind of just give you a different flavor for like the evolution really of what became the periodic table and then what became material science. But once upon a time was this like alchemy art.
Scott, I have to ask, is gallium safe for consumption, i.e. is this trick for these jesters perhaps their final one?
I don't think it's like the Mad Hatter situation or like a Nebuchadnezzar situation with arsenic or things like mercury and things like that. But I do think you want to be careful. And again, if you guys poke too much, you're going to realize the extent of my chemical knowledge and why I ended up with an environmental science degree. So
No. I'm glad we had the disclosure here. We are not responsible for any such incidents. But also, last thing here on this front. So, Scott, do you have periodic element party tricks? Is that what I'm hearing? Like, do you have a whole, history through the periodic table? Do you also know magic through the periodic table?
No, unfortunately, I mean, maybe a handful of party tricks. I don't know if I would, first of all, ever try to portray to the audience that I was as nerdy as to call them periodic table tricks. But no,
yeah, you got a reputation to maintain. I get it.
Yeah, no rabbits up the sleeve, and not a big center of attention on magic tricks at parties. Unfortunately, that's maybe I need to focus on that going forward.
No. Yeah, I mean, you're the CEO, so you already got a sweet title, and I know, Jay, we want to get into that and Noveon and what you all do. So.
Right. And so, Scott, I do want to thank you for a really comprehensive introduction to your background, how you found your interest in this particular area of focus.
Of course.
So let's now move into Noveon, which we know has been around since 2012 and is in the business of rethinking resources and is currently the only high-performance rare earth magnet manufacturer here in the U.S. So how did Noveon get its start, kind of following on to what you had introduced us to a minute ago? And what are the company's primary activities for our listeners who might not have heard of Noveon before today?
So, I mean, the first place to start is magnet manufacturing. Noveon is a magnet manufacturing company. To be a little bit more precise, it manufactures what are called neodymium iron boron sintered magnets or rare earth permanent magnets. This is already unique. Besides all of the syllables and all of the consonants that come with that, which make it sound unique, it actually is truly unique. This is an industry that's been around for some time. Maybe as early as the early 80s, but commercially speaking, and as of the last 2 decades, any sort of capability, know-how, or commercial footprint essentially has ceased to exist outside of China. And there's a whole host of reasons we'll get into for sure of why that's occurred. And so first and foremost, though, Noveon's a magnet manufacturing company. It's basically focused on commercializing, sort of reshoring, reestablishing production capacity, production capability here in the US. It's becoming a bigger and bigger deal. These materials are materials that are essential building blocks, really, in this energy future that we're sort of forging as we speak. As we move more to electrification, more through decarbonization and things like that, you use magnets really to play an energy conversion role in society. So where there's energy generation, energy transmission, energy distribution, or where there's energy storage, like vis-a-vis batteries, there's also energy conversion. And so the magnet is playing the critical conversion role. It's what's allowing electrical energy to become mechanical motion for us to do work in the form of like the motor, or it's the conversion of mechanical motion into electrical energy, which is the generator. And that energy can be stored or that energy can be used. So that is what Noveon is. It's essentially an energy conversion company. More specifically, it's a manufacturing company that produces these critical rare earth magnets, and where otherwise there's not a whole lot of outside of China capability that exists, which is an issue because these materials have become much more rapidly adopted in the last decade or two in those motor and generator technologies, and demand is exploding, but to the extent that supply is likely to be unable or available to sort of fulfill that demand. So all we're trying to do is essentially bring a manufacturing capability to market and offer at least some sort of an offset or at least some sort of an alternative to our customers who are very wholly dependent on these materials and these components, but by transitive property, I suppose, therefore also dependent on China in terms of its supply chain for these materials. So that's what our business does. What's very unique about what our business does, besides how little of this general capability exists outside of China, is also really the focus and the technological capability that we've brought to bear on this issue, which is significantly more sustainable. We can manufacture these magnetic materials using fully recycled feedstock materials. So we will in fact use magnetic materials that we recover from electric vehicles, hybrid electric vehicles, wind turbines, MRI machines, all other kinds of pumps and motors and generators, and actually bring those feedstock materials directly into our manufacturing process. And that is without any other kind of chemical treatment. And so we like to kind of be a magnet manufacturer first, which is kind of unique in its own right. But as far as one of a kind goes, we're a magnet manufacturing business that is essentially redefining an entire supply chain and the nature of our raw materials and inputs to be as great as 100% recycled, which is not just an environmental issue. It's also a supply chain issue that we're really passionate about solving and scaling.
Well, you talk about being the 100% recycled output, but we've also read that only about 1% of rare earths are ultimately recycled from their end products, mainly due to lack of collection or difficulty in the feasibility of recycling. So, like, where's the disconnect there? Is it just that Noveon is a smaller piece of the pie, or you're just going quickly and that dynamic will change quickly?
That statement is a true statement. It's also characteristic of kind of look back. It's not necessarily characteristic of the upcoming decade plus.
Okay.
But that is correct. So historically speaking, rare earth magnets, which by the way are predominantly iron, maybe 30% rare earth, 60% iron. If there's not a downstream technology for recovering these materials, then they basically are what? Scrap iron? Why would scrap iron, in terms of price, necessarily catalyze or incentivize significant recovery efforts towards rare earth magnets. It doesn't make any sense. I think it kind of starts with technology and really in our case with a whole recycling capability and a method which is direct to manufacturing instead of maybe something that's indirect like chemical separation and things like that.
When you say direct to manufacturing, do you mean like you take in the end products, you, without chemicals, I guess, take out the inputs and then put them direct into your manufacturing process so there's not a disconnect?
That's correct. And if I was to characterize anything we do here as a breakthrough, it's really that ability to use recycled materials, waste materials, and to go directly into producing a very, very highly engineered finished product that is delivered to, your OEMs as the customer. There's no intermediary product, there's no commodity product or commodity
Right.
steps that are taken, and that's really unique about what we do.
No, totally. I mean, being the domestic producer of these EcoFlux magnets, which are these high-performing magnets, can use them to power EV motors, wind turbines, other applications we need to advance sustainability, and do it with recycled material here in the US, huge. I do want to ask, though, for that recycled material that you're taking in, recycling, and putting right into that finished product, where do you get all this stuff? How do you get the feedstock?
There's different trade-offs and things that make more sense than others. We recycle, for example, from data center clusters for the hard disk drive. We recycle for different powertrain assembly plants here in North America that are building those hybrid and battery electric platforms for either tier one and OEM type producers. Really cool one is we actually have done a nationwide e-mobility program. So all those scooters that you kind of see laying around different cities or whatever, all powered by electric motors using rare earth magnets. So we recycle a lot of scooters.
Yeah, we did a whole episode on e-mobility.
I mean, that's a fascinating one.
Yep.
We do MRI machines. We decommission wind turbine. At the end of the day, our focus is to have all things combined in terms of incoming, what I'll call feedstock material. It's essentially to support as much of our production as possible by those materials. It's to have as little intermittency as we possibly can build into our own supply chain for those recycled materials. And the way we do that is to work with pre-consumer, post-consumer, OEM, salvage yards, all of the above type parties, and just basically teach them what to do, how to make the most economic sense out of it, or the most kind of economic return for them to justify those activities to take place, and bring as much of that material into our facility as possible to support our ramping production.
Scott, so interesting. I think to your point, we could just keep diving into this technical stuff, but I do want to perhaps encourage us to take a step back and unpack a little bit of these traditional mining practices that I think a lot of our definers might have in mind when we start talking about this topic generally. So, as we know, traditional mining practices can have damaging, long-lasting effects on the environment. There's a huge trade-off, of course, here between using these minerals to create the infrastructure and generate the renewable energy needed to address climate change, and on the other side, the environmental and social impact of mining for these minerals in the first place. So how would you advise our listeners think about this trade-off generally?
Yeah, when we think about transition, when we think about electrification, when we think about decarbonization, all these things that are also supposed to lead to cleaner, lower carbon type outcome, you're talking about a transition away from fossil fuels. And I think that the word of the day, the association there is drilling. But what the transition entails is therefore more digging. So I think we all have to be, first of all, reasonable and practicable and just, acknowledge the equation here. A transition away from fossil fuels means more digging. So that's the trade-off. Where does that digging occur? How is it regulated? How efficient is it? What are certain best practices that are being employed actually in those locations? Obviously, it's a very different situation to be digging in a place like North America than it is to be digging in a place like Africa or most of Asia. So like these are broad issues and broad questions and challenges we should be asking ourselves about, but you can't escape it. That is what transition entails. It is what transition requires.
Yeah, it reminds me, I heard a talk from someone who leads sustainability at BlackRock, the large investor.
Of course, yeah.
And he was saying that we're going to have to do more bad to do good. And like you said, there's very degrees of that bad. But in general, mining, it's not the greatest. So, but we need it to make the transition you're talking about. So I thought that was kind of a pithy way of putting it, doing more bad to do good. But beyond industry innovating so that it can better meet the needs of its customers and tell a better story, where does policy fit into this? Are there any policies or legislation that you're keeping your eye on? Are there any that you think will help or hinder the work of your company or others in rare earths?
I think we are going to see certain tax credit and through to even carbon credit type treatment for producers, for buyers of those products, especially those products that are produced domestically. We potentially may see certain incentive or maybe sort of take back or what I'll call like responsible recycling type focus on disposition of end of life materials containing rare earths versus just, exporting to whoever's the highest payer overseas. So I think unfortunately, the bigger issue is not like, is it happening? Is there awareness? Is it moving forward? I think the bigger issue is on what timeline? How quickly will government and all of its tools at its disposal engage with and literally affect production and recycling activities in the US? And can that attention and can that wherewithal and can that commitment be sustained? We are dealing, in the case of rare earths, with like practically a 20-year to 30-year head start that places like China have over the US. So the other issue there is what's the quantum of capital that people actually understand that this might take to do and to do so on an accelerated timeline. So I think there's a lot of questions that still need to be answered that will only be kind of measured by actual response and behaviors. But look, there's way more awareness now than when I got started. It's across the government. It's not just kind of like defense specific. And I think to the extent that we can get real on how quickly that response is required or how quickly that response is like necessary, then, I'm optimistic about government's ability to support propagating and like accelerating, establishing a full supply chain capability in this country or across allied nations. But if we're just kind of going on the normal speed of government, I think it's going to get to 2030. I think it's going to get to 2035. And we're going to really be kind of scratching our head and wishing we had maybe had some other conviction and had some other focus on these issues, because that is when these issues are going to hit the fan.
Excellent. Well, Scott, let's keep our eyes on the future, but now turn it to Noveon. So the company is growing in size. We see it's approaching 100 employees and preparing to expand internationally. First off, congratulations. But we want to know, what does the future look like for Noveon? Any plans to expand your impact further, or perhaps any exciting goals in the works?
And it's just us, Scott. No one's going to hear this.
Yeah. Hey, no, it's okay. I mean, a lot of this is kind of just worn on the sleeves. I mean, we intend to build about at least two more, basically, of the facilities we have here in Texas in the course of about the next, 3 to 5 years, mindfully. So what do I mean by that? This is hardcore stuff. I mean, the supply chain doesn't exist. There aren't even equipment vendors that produce this equipment. We're training machinists and developing all of our own capabilities here in house because they just don't exist anywhere.
Yeah, you're not just picking off out of a catalog.
Yeah, I'd love to pick up a phone and say, hey, I need this thing, and they say, oh, it's it's $50 million, but like it's turnkey, it's going to be delivered in 12 months. It doesn't exist. We don't have applied materials. We don't have everyone who everyone else gets to rely on to deliver really sophisticated manufacturing capability. So we're very focused on Europe in the near future. As well. A lot of our customers are European as well. Their manufacturing occurs regionally. So we're going to be focused on basically North America and Europe for the next couple of years. So now we're expecting to go from about 75 heads to about 250 heads in the next couple of years. And then at that point, I think we just, along the way, we'll probably raise a few other kind of growth capital type events and then potentially think about a public event. But, these are certainly a little bit more on the horizon than they are boots on the ground, blocking and tackling today to just ensure, execution and manufacturing excellence. And then, it's easy to copy that. It's not so easy to just scale for the sake of scale when you don't have that down to an absolute binder that's ready to be duplicated and deployed.
Excellent.
So Scott, we do want to do our traditional last question here. So let's assume that we're at a book club, right? And the book club is reading Disappearing Spoon. So we're all talking rare earths. We're feeling good about it. But then someone comes across our book club and they're like, what are y'all talking about? And we're like, oh, rare earths. And they're like, what's that? And then we want to hit them with a party fact about rare earths. Just a a stat, something that's going to make them go, oh, I didn't know that. Tell me more. What is that one party fact about rare earths that our listeners can use?
Okay, that's a good one. That's a good one. This might be in the disappearing spoon. I forget. Let me tell you how similar rare earth materials are. The periodic table is fascinating. How it was predicted, how it was ultimately proven and discovered. I mean, it's just cool stuff. So rare earths, I believe the first element it was predicted by Mendeleev. Of course, all of them were. But the first physical discovery that was quote unquote a rare earth element, I believe was by Gadolin. Gadolin was a Swedish chemist, something like that. And an element's named after him, gadolinium. But he thought he had discovered a new element. And in fact, the entire scientific community confirmed that he had discovered a new element. But this is how chemically similar and complex and reactive rare earth materials are. But for another 100 years, no one realized that this guy discovered 14 new elements until we even had the instruments and the capability for detecting and for measuring, such. So this guy discovered practically all of the lanthanides kind of existing as they do, together in their own form or whatever.
Yeah.
And it literally took that long before someone said, hey, you know what? That guy discovered 14 different elements. All of those elements fit exactly the characterization that was predicted when the periodic table was predicted, and nobody even knew that, and including the guy that discovered it. So there's such unique elements. Everyone should go on a little bit of their own journey. You can't sleep, go down your internet rabbit holes, or get a couple of books, or listen to a couple of podcasts, and you'll have a good time. If nothing else, you'll kill a road trip, and then go on with your lives.
Well, thanks, Scott, for walking us through your story and your company's story, but also calling us to learn more. I hope the listeners feel like they have a good sense of rare earths. I didn't honestly know too much about it. I knew it was a thing. I knew it was important for so many applications of the things that we rely on day to day, things to power the sustainability transition, but even just our phones and whatever, the things we don't even think about how important these things are. So it's really been a light bulb for me on how important this is, but also the need for companies like yours that recycle them and develop products that are made from recycled material, because we only have so much of it. So thanks so much for all that.
Yeah, no problem, guys. This is a pleasure. This is a lot better than leading the other meetings and presentations of the day. Next time over some drinks or something.
That sounds great to me.
Scott, thank you so much for joining us. We're excited to share this with our definers.
Thanks guys a lot. I appreciate the work you're doing as well. Thank you very much.
Sure, thanks.
Okay, Scott, I'm realizing that Neil Diamond is actually playing in Denver tonight, and his show's coming up quickly, so why don't we just go ahead and wrap this episode up?
Wow, the real Neil Diamond.
You would think he's a super rare earth mineral, but he's actually going to be here tonight, so I got to take advantage.
Okay, well, I hope the processing of that goes well. All right, with that, let's get to our thank yous. So first, we want to thank Evan Keller of Kivit, who is very helpful facilitating all the things with Scott and Noveon and just making that an easy process for us.
And of course, we'd like to thank Taylor Price for an absolutely killer set of intro notes. Well done. Mm-hmm. And we'd like to thank Keaton Butler, who again turns our audio files into a real, actual produced podcast episode. So thank you both.
And unfortunately, Jay, none of our definers left us a review. So we got nothing to read.
Oh, man. I've got a good feeling about next episode, though.
I do too. You're an optimist. You have a cornucopian.
I'm that bingo.
It's one of my favorite things to read these reviews. So I really hope there is one next time. All right, Jay, that about does it. You all stay sustainable out there. I'm Scott Breen.
And I'm Jay Siegel. We will see you next time.